Ahoy, today I want to do a quick test of the David Laboga Mamzer 30 and compare it to some of my favourite Celestion vintage 30s. The David Laboga Mamzer 30 is made by Fane in the UK. They're not very well known and there's only a handful of demos of this speaker on YouTube. They're made in limited numbers, so I couldn't resist picking one up in 8 and one in 16 ohm a little while back. I haven't tried these speakers out yet and I'm genuinely curious about how they sound, so I decided to make a little quick test, a little less scientific test than my usual videos, just to get a feel for these speakers. I want to compare them in the same cabs compared to some of my favorite vintage 30s at the same time. So I've got the 16 ohm Mamzer 30 already mounted in my Zilla cap back here next to a 2002 vintage 30 in 16 ohm, and this 8 ohm Mamzer is going in my Engl XXL 412 cab here next to a Celestion vintage 30 from 2003. I'm going to be miking both the Celestion vintage 30 and the Mamzer 30 with SM57s in the same relative positions, or as close as I can get to those positions anyway. The SM57s I'll be using are from the same era, so they should sound pretty similar, but of course they won't sound identical, so please keep that in mind. It's not as scientific as I'd usually go about it. I'll be playing some riffs through the Zilla using my Dover DA50 and some riffs through the Engl using my Engl Fireball, because both these amps sound tight as a tiger without a boost in front, and I couldn't be bothered setting up an OD pedal down here. And also I think those amps look cool on those cabs, so I'm going to record both speakers at the same time and then switch back and forth in post. Let's dig in. As my Vintage 30 quest is slowly coming to an end, hopefully at least, I've said that before a few times, I've been looking into some of the alternatives to the Vintage 30, like the Warehouse or Mojo Tone offerings, and eventually I plan to shoot them all out in my ISO cab and compare them with frequency response graphs like I've done before. But at the moment, the ISO cab is occupied by the V30 break-in test, and I don't want to stop that. I don't want to mess with the setup as to not influence the results. But the Mamzer 30 really had me curious, so I really wanted to give that a test beforehand, so I chucked it into my front-loading cabs to give it a spin. So eventually there'll be a bigger and more methodical test video. But until then, would you like to see some of the other speakers that I have in mind shot out like this in actual cabs, less scientific, like the Warehouse 30, Retro 30, Mojo Tone, BV 30Vs and whatnot? Let me know in the comments please, because this was a lot of fun for me. As for the recordings, I have a few observations. In hindsight, it might not have been the best idea to pair one of my tightest and brightest amps with probably my tightest cab. As pleasing as it was to the eye for me, one of the details might have been a better pairing for the Zilla cab, but don't let my incompetence fool you. Both the Zilla front-loading cab and the Dover DA50 are excellent pieces of gear. As for the Engl cab, that sounded so good in the room. I had such a good time. The hardest part about that rig was stop playing. It took me a minute to adjust to the sounds of the cabs in the rooms because, as ridiculous as this might sound, given my enthusiasm for speakers and especially the number of V30s I've acquired over the years, I very rarely play through real cabs anymore. There's something to be said about the convenience of IRs, especially in my living situation where I often need to be mindful of noise, but there's nothing like moving a bit of air. And then I had a brainwave. Why not dust off some of my favorite microphones and try to make some IRs myself? So I did. And I'm going to provide one IR for each speaker for you to download to do your own A/B testing at home. Now, these might not be the most accurate representation of the individual speaker because I can't expect to revolutionize the IR game on the first try, and there's power amp coloration and whatnot. I need to refine my process a bit. But for a direct comparison between the Mamzer 30 and the Vintage 30, these might even be a better means than my test recordings because those mic stands were flimsy. I might have bumped into one now and then. I can't guarantee that they were always in the exact same position. I need to get some better mic stands. In fact, I've ordered some already. But for the IRs, I built a little jig to place the microphones, and I placed them exactly in the same position for each speaker. So again, those might be more suitable for comparing the speaker's characters to each other. As for the Mamzer 30s, first of all, this wasn't a fair fight. I compared them to vintage 30s from the early 2000s. So they're over 20 years old. They've probably had their fair share of beating. And generally, the early year 2000 speakers are considered to be some of the best vintage 30s out there. So we need to keep that in mind. But despite that, I think they sounded really, really good. In fact, I really like the 8 ohm speaker. So much that I'm considering buying a second one to put in my Engl 412 in an X pattern permanently. They definitely share a lot of similarities with the Vintage 30, tonally, at least to my extra average ears, but they have a really nice cutting quality. I would imagine they'd have no problem standing out in the mix. However, I will be reserving my final judgment until I shoot the speaker out in my ISO cab with the fixed microphone and frequency response graphs. That's all I have for now. Let me know what you think of the Mamzer 30s in the comments, please, and check out the IRs if you have the means. Yep. Thanks for watching. Bye.